The highway outside San Angelo, Texas, was almost empty, the kind of stretch where sound traveled too far and silence felt heavy. Marcus Hale's pickup rolled to a stop on the gravel shoulder, dust lifting and settling like a held breath. The red and blue lights behind him kept spinning, painting the darkness in violent colors that made his stomach tighten. Marcus stayed still for a moment longer than he should have. His fingers were locked around the steering wheel, knuckles white, sweat slick on his palms despite the cool night air. He told himself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the medic had taught him after his second tour, the way that worked sometimes. But the lights kept flashing. They were too bright, too fast. Each pulse felt like a flare bursting overhead. His chest began to tighten, ribs squeezing inward, lungs refusing to pull in enough air. The road ahead blurred, and for a terrifying second the highway wasn't Texas anymore. It was Helmand Province. The smell of hot metal and sand flooded his senses. His ears rang with phantom gunfire. Somewhere deep in his mind, a voice shouted orders he hadn't heard in years. "Get out, move now." A sharp knock on the driver's window snapped him back. "Sir, turn the engine off." Marcus flinched hard. His boot slammed the floorboard as he scrambled to comply, the truck engine dying with a rough cough. He raised his hands slowly, painfully aware of how fast his heart was beating. "Yes, sir," he muttered, voice hoarse. "Yes, sir." The officer's flashlight cut across his face, lingering on the stubble along his jaw, the tension in his eyes. Marcus avoided eye contact, staring instead at the dashboard where a small purple heart medal hung from the rearview mirror, swaying gently. Another officer approached from the passenger side. Younger, tighter posture. His hand hovered near his holster like it had a mind of its own. "Step out of the vehicle," the first officer ordered. Marcus nodded, but his body didn't move right away. His legs felt heavy, disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. He swallowed and forced the door open. The night air hit him, sharp and cold, raising goosebumps along his arms. He stepped down onto the gravel. The crunch under his boots echoed too loudly. Every sound did. "Hands where we can see them," the younger officer said. Marcus raised his hands higher, palms open, fingers spread. He knew the drill. He had taught soldiers younger than these officers how to do this, how to survive encounters, how to stay calm when authority had weapons. "Just follow instructions," he told himself. "You've done worse." But his vision kept narrowing. The edges of the world darkened, tunneling inward. His breath came faster now, shallow and uneven. Behind the officers, a patrol car door opened. Then he heard it. A low, controlled growl. Marcus's stomach dropped. He turned his head slightly and saw the K-9 unit stepping out of the shadows. The dog was massive, black and tan, muscles defined under short fur, eyes sharp and alert. Its paws hit the ground with quiet confidence, nails clicking softly as it moved. The handler held the leash tight, but the dog's focus was already locked on Marcus. Something inside Marcus snapped. His pulse roared in his ears, drowning out everything else. The growl blended with the memory of engines, explosions, the distant scream of a radio cut short. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. I'm not armed," Marcus said quickly. "I'm a vet, I'm just—" "Sir, stop talking," the first officer cut in. "Get on the ground now." The word ground sent a jolt through him. Marcus tried. He really did. His knees bent, but his balance wavered. The gravel shifted beneath his boots, and suddenly he wasn't sure which way was down. The K-9 took a step forward. The growl deepened. "Sir," the younger officer shouted, "get down." Marcus's breath hitched. His chest burned. He could feel sweat trickling down his spine, his shirt sticking to his skin. His mind screamed danger, screamed that this was the moment everything went wrong. "I can't," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "I'm trying, I swear I'm trying." The handler's grip tightened on the leash. The dog lunged forward just enough to test the restraint, teeth flashing briefly in the strobing lights. Marcus's knees finally gave out, and he dropped halfway, one hand instinctively reaching toward the ground for balance. The officers reacted instantly. "Don't move. Hands up. Watch his hands." Voices overlapped, sharp and panicked. To Marcus, they blended into noise, indistinct, threatening, impossible to process. He squeezed his eyes shut. Images slammed into him. A convoy, a roadside blast, a friend screaming his name and then not screaming at all. His mouth opened, and without realizing it, words slipped out, words he hadn't spoken in years. "I'm back here," he whispered. "I can't see. Please don't send the dog." The handler froze. The dog did too. The leash went slack for half a second, and time seemed to stretch thin. The K-9's ears twitched. Its head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as it studied the man in front of it, not as a suspect, not as a target, but as something else entirely. Marcus opened his eyes. The dog was closer now, too close. He could see the individual hairs along its muzzle, the reflection of the police lights in its dark eyes. His heart hammered so hard it felt like it might tear free from his chest. The handler swallowed. "Release?" the younger officer asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. The first officer hesitated, jaw tight. The moment hung there, fragile and dangerous. Marcus stayed perfectly still, kneeling in the gravel, hands trembling in the air, staring at the animal that could change his life in a single second. The handler took a breath. And then he gave the command. Marcus felt the leash tighten like a tether to some invisible danger. The command to release the dog had been given, and the K-9's powerful shoulders tensed, muscles coiling like springs ready to launch. Time slowed in that Texas night, each heartbeat thudding so loudly he could swear it was echoing off the asphalt. He forced his gaze downward, unwilling to meet the animal's eyes, but they found him anyway. For Marcus, that gaze wasn't just the eyes of a police dog. It was a trigger. Memories he'd buried deep, the kind of nightmares that didn't fade with therapy, came clawing back to life. Afghanistan, 2009. The sun had barely risen over the mountains when a convoy they were guarding hit an IED. Marcus remembered the blast so vividly. He could feel the dust in his lungs, the heat against his face, the screams of men he'd called brothers. The world had split into before and after. Before, there was a sense of control, of purpose. After, everything was chaos. Every sudden shout, every sharp movement, every growl or bark of a dog yanked him back there. His breath hitched. The K-9 took another step forward and Marcus's body locked, not in defiance but in fear, the primal freeze of a mind reliving combat trauma. "Sir, move, hands where I can see them," the younger officer barked. Marcus tried to respond, tried to explain, but the words tumbled into a strangled sob. I'm a veteran. I've served. I'm not." The older officer cut him off, voice sharp as a whip. "I don't care who you are, move." Marcus's vision narrowed to a tunnel. The patrol lights were no longer red and blue, they were tracer fire. Each pulse of light felt like gunfire slamming into him, each command a grenade going off in his skull. His legs refused to obey. His hands shook violently as he tried to lower himself to the ground. He heard shouting. The dog's growl deepened, a low rumble vibrating through the gravel. Marcus's mind fragmented into images he didn't want to see, friends lost, bodies torn, chaos and smoke and sand choking him. He dropped to one knee, trying desperately to ground himself, but it was no use. Every fiber of his being screamed that he was under attack, that he had to react to survive. The handler's grip on the leash was iron. "Down," he commanded, voice authoritative. The K-9's muscles coiled further, its teeth flashing in the alternating red and blue lights. Marcus's vision blurred with tears. He remembered SGT. Ramirez, his squad leader, shot in an ambush just a few feet from him, calling his name before he died. He remembered the dog, a military working dog named Axel, from the forward operating base, leaping toward insurgents without hesitation, protective and loyal. Axel had saved lives more than once. And now, decades later, Marcus found himself facing another dog, trained for aggression, ready to attack at a command he could not control. I can't, please," he whispered, voice cracking. His body was frozen, every nerve screaming, and he knew the officers misread it. They thought he was stalling, resisting. They didn't know. They couldn't know. This wasn't defiance. This was survival mode. The K-9 lunged an inch closer, snapping Marcus back to reality. His hands went up instinctively, palms out, pleading. The leash stretched tight, rattling the dog's collar, and the handler barked. "Attack!" Marcus froze. He wanted to scream, but his throat was raw, dry, unresponsive. His eyes darted wildly, scanning the patrol lights, the officers, the asphalt. And in that moment, the years of training in war collided with the trauma that still haunted him. He fell to both knees, then collapsed fully onto the gravel, forehead pressed against the ground. Dust filled his nose and mouth. His arms wrapped around his chest as if he could hold himself together. Every nerve ending was alive with terror. "Stand down," a voice shouted behind him. It was unexpected, different from the sharp commands. Softer but urgent, Marcus dared to lift his head slightly. The dog was frozen mid-lunge, muscles taut, but its eyes were watching him, not attacking, not threatening, watching, assessing. Marcus gasped for air, the memories of gunfire and explosions still vivid. The screams of his fallen comrades echoed in his ears, blending with the growl of the K-9. He felt utterly exposed, completely vulnerable, like he was back in Afghanistan, trapped in a crater with no cover. He whispered almost unintentionally, "I'm not your enemy, please don't." The dog tilted its head, ears flicking. A low whine escaped its throat. Marcus's body convulsed with sobs. He could feel the weight of his own despair, decades of unprocessed trauma pressing him into the ground. He remembered the first time he broke down in front of a civilian years ago, and how shame had burned him more than any wound in combat. And now, under the flashing lights, with a K-9 inches from him and officers shouting commands he couldn't follow, Marcus felt that shame return with a vengeance. The older officer's patience was thinning. "Move," he barked again, voice edged with frustration. But the dog hesitated, shifting slightly but refusing to advance further. Its growl softened, almost questioning. The handler's jaw tightened. He tugged on the leash, but the dog resisted, nose close to Marcus's shoulder. The officers exchanged glances, confusion written across their faces. Marcus's tears ran freely now, streaking dirt and sweat along his cheeks. The tunnel vision that had taken over his senses gradually began to recede, replaced by the incredulous realization that the dog wasn't attacking him. Somehow, against every instinct, every command, it hesitated. Marcus gasped, shaking, whispering hoarsely, "It knows." The words hung in the night like a secret no one else understood. The K-9 pressed closer, body warm against Marcus, softening its growl into a whine. His sobs became heavier, but for the first time in minutes, or years, he felt a sliver of relief. The dog's refusal to attack created a fragile space between terror and safety. The handler's voice grew urgent, frustrated. "Go, do it." The dog ignored him. The other officers froze, unsure, tension crackling through the night air like static electricity. Cameras from nearby cars recorded the moment in real time. Bystanders, drawn by the flashing lights, began to gather at a distance, watching in disbelief. Marcus pressed his forehead harder against the gravel, feeling the dog's heartbeat through its chest. For one brief, impossible moment, the war he carried inside him met a living, breathing understanding in the animal before him. And in that moment he realized something had shifted. The dog hadn't attacked. And Marcus wasn't sure if he was still fighting for his life, or just beginning to survive it. The tension in the night air was almost unbearable. Marcus's body trembled violently, his forehead pressed to the coarse gravel, every nerve ending buzzing with adrenaline. The K-9 sat just inches from him, taut and alert, yet refusing to obey the handler's commands. Its powerful frame radiated strength, but its eyes, dark, intelligent, and unyielding, were fixed on Marcus in a way that defied everything the veteran had been taught about fear and threat assessment. The older officer, jaw tight and face pale, barked again, "Release the dog." The handler's knuckles whitened on the leash. He gave a sharp tug and the dog growled, low and menacing, but still did not move. The other officers froze in confusion, their training colliding with the impossible scene unfolding before them. The handler's mouth moved, repeating the command with increasing urgency, "Attack! Take him down!" The dog's head tilted. Marcus's hands were trembling so hard now that he could barely keep them raised. The growl faded into a whine, almost human in its sound. And then, almost imperceptibly, the dog lowered its head. Its nose brushed against Marcus's shoulder. The veteran's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't moved. He hadn't begged. He hadn't done anything except survive long enough for someone, or something, to notice the difference between a threat and a broken man. I'm not." Marcus's voice cracked into a whisper. The K-9 responded by pressing closer. Its massive body shifted slightly, leaning into him, almost protective. The handler tugged again, sharper this time, trying to regain control, but the dog resisted like steel wire. Marcus could feel the strain in the leash transfer through to the handler's hands, yet the animal refused to obey. "What the hell is wrong with him?" the younger officer shouted. Marcus's knees were caked in dirt and sweat. He felt raw, stripped of all pretense, all control, all armor he'd built over decades of life and war. The dog's presence was grounding, terrifyingly gentle, and terrifyingly powerful at the same time. He remembered every dog he had known in the military, every partner that had saved him, every animal that had been more loyal and understanding than most humans he had ever met. I can't fight it," he whispered, and the words were barely audible above the hum of the patrol lights and the distant echo of highway traffic. The K-9 stance was rigid yet calm. Its ears flicked at every sound. Its muscles flexed in anticipation but never in attack. Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from its body. He leaned forward slightly, instinctively reaching toward the dog. The handler's hands tensed, ready to reel the animal back. "Step back," the officer barked. "He's non-compliant." Marcus didn't respond. He was frozen, caught between panic and some strange, raw sense of connection. Memories from the battlefield tore through him again. The day he had been pinned behind a wall of rubble, dust choking his lungs, gunfire echoing around him, a military dog pressing against his back to protect him as he crawled to safety. He had forgotten the feeling until now, the way a dog could sense fear and need, the way it could read a soul that no human could. The K-9 lowered itself slightly, its nose now brushing the gravel near Marcus's knees. Its eyes never left his face. Marcus closed his eyes, taking in the warmth, the presence, the unbelievable defiance of instinct for obedience. For a moment it was just him and the dog, the entire world reduced to the flashing lights, the night air, and the palpable tension that hung like a knife over their heads. "Get him off me," the younger officer shouted, stepping closer. Marcus flinched but did not move. He had no choice. His legs were too weak, his nerves too frayed. His mouth opened to plead, but the words didn't come. All he could do was lean forward, burying his face near the dog's shoulder. And in that small, impossible gesture, something miraculous happened. The dog lowered its massive head and rested it against him. The crowd that had gathered on the side of the road gasped, several people capturing every second on their phones. The silence was deafening. The officers froze, unsure whether to intervene, unsure whether they had the right to act, unsure whether the dog had gone rogue or was performing some miraculous act of empathy. "Step away," the handler shouted again, but the dog's eyes never wavered. Its body shifted slightly, nudging Marcus gently, almost as if it were saying, "I've got you. I know you're not the enemy." Marcus's sobs broke free. He had tried to suppress them, tried to appear in control, tried to survive like a soldier should. But now, in the middle of a Texas highway, kneeling on gravel under the flashing patrol lights, he let them go. Tears streamed down his face. His shoulders shook violently, and the K-9 pressed closer, almost protective. The officers' confusion grew. One whispered to another, "I've never seen anything like this." Marcus whispered, voice barely audible, it knows who I am." The older officer finally took a cautious step forward. "Stand up," he said, softer this time, trying a different tactic. Marcus shook his head violently, unable. He couldn't stand. He couldn't respond. He was pinned in place, but not by force, by fear, by trauma, by memories of war. The K-9's growl faded entirely, replaced by soft whines and the occasional sniff. It pressed its head against him like a living shield. The handler tugged again, but it was like trying to pull steel. The dog had made its choice. Marcus's chest heaved with sobs, his body trembling from head to toe. And then something shifted in the officers' perception. They began to see what Marcus had always known. This was no ordinary encounter. This wasn't about compliance or law enforcement. This was about recognition. The dog had recognized a fellow soldier, a man shaped by trauma, a man who had faced real danger and survived. It had decided in its own instinctive, impossible way that Marcus was not a threat. Marcus looked up through the blur of tears. The dog's eyes held him, unflinching, unjudging, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt seen. The handler's jaw tightened. "Do you see this?" he muttered under his breath. This isn't supposed to happen." Marcus whispered again, almost to himself. "I'm not your enemy. I swear I'm not your enemy." The K-9 pressed its massive body closer. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't obeying commands that would have made it a weapon. It was calm, steady, unwavering, a living testament to something Marcus hadn't felt in years, understanding. And then the unthinkable happened. The first officer, frustrated and tense, took a step forward. The handler tensed, leash taut, but the K-9 didn't lunge. It sat perfectly still, eyes locked on Marcus. The officer's voice faltered, almost human now. Marcus realized the truth in that instant. The dog had saved him, not from officers, not from an attack, but from himself, from panic, from the memories that threatened to consume him right there on the asphalt. And as the patrol lights continued to flash, illuminating the scene like a war zone paused in time, Marcus whispered once more, "It knows, it really knows." The dog pressed closer. The night held its breath, and somewhere just beyond the highway, the faint hum of life carried on. But for Marcus, everything had changed. The night air was thick with tension, a living thing that seemed to press against everyone at the roadside. The flashing red and blue lights from the patrol cars cast jittering shadows across the gravel, highlighting the disbelief etched into the officers' faces and the curious fear rippling through the small crowd that had gathered. Marcus Hale remained kneeling, chest heaving, his forehead pressed to the rough gravel. Beside him, the K-9 had made its choice. It would not bite. The dog's massive body pressed gently against him, warm and unyielding. Its eyes were dark, intelligent, and unflinching. The growl that had vibrated through the tension moments earlier had completely softened, replaced by low whines that resonated in Marcus's chest like a heartbeat syncing with his own. The handler's hands trembled on the leash, every muscle taut, every instinct screaming that the animal should obey. "Go," he barked. "Attack now." The dog simply sat down, its paws digging into the gravel, its nose brushing lightly against Marcus's shoulder. It was the first time in years Marcus had felt the strange, almost unbearable relief of being understood without words. He closed his eyes, chest rising and falling rapidly. Memories from his tour returned in vivid, uncontrollable bursts. convoys ambushed in Helmand province, screams of men caught in explosions, the dust, the heat, the adrenaline-fueled fear that never truly left him. But here, on this quiet Texas road, under the harsh glare of patrol lights, the K-9's refusal to attack was a lifeline, grounding him to the present in a way no human had been able to. The younger officer took a step back, confusion painting his features. I don't understand. Why isn't he biting?" he stammered. The older officer, jaw tight, didn't answer. He just watched. The crowd whispered, their murmurs building into a low hum of shock and curiosity. Phones raised in the night captured every second, the videos already destined to explode across social media before the night was over. Marcus's hands, still trembling, slowly lowered to the ground. His fingers brushed against the coarse gravel. He dared a glance up at the dog, which remained steadfastly by his side. He could feel the weight of its body, the warmth of its presence, the silent understanding in its gaze. For a man who had carried the war inside him for over a decade, the sensation was disorienting and almost unbearable in its intensity. I don't want any trouble," Marcus whispered, voice hoarse. "I'm not." The dog nudged him gently with its nose, as if confirming his words. Its body pressed closer, protective and calm. It wasn't just refusing to attack, it was choosing to protect him. The handler's face tightened. "He's disobeying a direct order," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The leash jerked slightly as he tried again to assert control, but the dog resisted, muscles taut as steel. "Step back," the older officer ordered, voice unsteady now. "Give him space." Marcus's chest heaved. He swallowed hard, feeling every raw nerve ending alive with tension. The dog had stopped the officer's immediate threat, not with aggression, but with refusal. It had made a choice for mercy in a situation where mercy was almost impossible to imagine. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. A woman whispered, "Is that a police dog?" Another man muttered, "He's not moving, the dog's protecting him." Cameras clicked, flashes lit up the scene, and Marcus's heart pounded as he realized that this moment, this unbelievable, impossible moment, was being witnessed by dozens, maybe hundreds, and soon by millions online. Marcus dared to lean closer to the dog, wrapping his trembling arms lightly around its neck. It pressed back into him, still seated but unwavering, letting him lean on it for stability. Tears streamed freely down his cheeks, streaking dirt and sweat, mixing with the shock and relief that coursed through him. The officers exchanged glances, their training colliding with the surreal reality unfolding before them. They had been prepared for compliance or resistance, for threats or evasions, but never for this. A police dog choosing empathy over aggression was beyond their manuals, beyond their expectations. The handler's jaw tightened again. "You have to follow my commands," he said firmly, trying to regain authority. But the dog ignored him, nose brushing against Marcus's shoulder, eyes locked on the veteran with something like recognition, something almost human in its depth. Marcus's sobs broke again, uncontrolled. He could barely speak. It knows," he whispered. "It knows who I am." The crowd gasped at that. One young man, phone still recording, said, Did he say the dog knows him?" Another shook their head, muttering, "This is insane." The older officer finally exhaled sharply, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Step away slowly," he said to Marcus, carefully, choosing his words like a diplomat navigating a minefield. "Don't make sudden moves." Marcus nodded, trembling. Slowly, cautiously, he allowed himself to rise, hands still in the air, though the dog stayed close, brushing against him with a protective insistence. He realized he was no longer alone in this terrifying encounter. The K-9 was his shield, his anchor, his reminder that not everything in the world was out to destroy him. The handler gave a frustrated grunt but loosened his grip slightly. The leash slackened. Marcus could feel the tension shift, the invisible weight of danger easing just a fraction. The dog remained steadfast, unwavering in its silent decision to protect him. For Marcus, it was overwhelming. For years, he had battled ghosts from combat, nightmares that had infiltrated every quiet moment, every loud noise, every unfamiliar touch or glance. And here, in the unlikeliest of circumstances, a dog, a creature trained for aggression, had recognized him, had assessed him, had chosen to stand with him instead of against him. He looked up at the officers. Their faces were pale, uncertain. The K-9 had refused orders. The crowd had witnessed a miracle. Marcus's chest heaved. He could feel his pulse slowing, his nerves settling slightly, the adrenaline bleeding away just enough for him to begin to grasp the enormity of the moment. And then the realization struck him. This encounter, this night, would never be forgotten. Not by him, not by the officers, not by the witnesses, and certainly not by the millions who would see the footage online. For a man who had spent years fighting wars he couldn't leave behind, the dog's simple act of refusal was more than an intervention. It was validation, recognition, understanding, compassion. Marcus whispered again, voice cracking, "Thank you, thank you." The dog's ears flicked, tail wagging slightly, almost imperceptibly. It pressed closer as if to say, "I've got you." The officers began to lower their weapons, uncertainty giving way to awe. The handler finally stepped back, jaw tight, and muttered, "I don't know how he did it. I've never seen anything like it." Marcus slowly rose to his feet, still trembling, still supported by the dog's steady presence. The crowd murmured, some clapping softly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Phones continued to record, flashing lights capturing every miraculous, impossible second. The night had shifted forever. Marcus realized something profound. The K-9 hadn't just stopped an attack. It had stopped history from repeating itself. And as he looked down at the massive animal beside him, warmth radiating through its body, he understood a truth he had long ignored. Sometimes, the most profound heroism didn't come from humans. It came from those who could see and respond to pain without judgment. The dog wouldn't bite. But in its refusal, it had saved Marcus Hale in ways no one could have imagined. The patrol lights continued to flash, casting long, jittering shadows across the Texas highway. But for Marcus Hale, the world had narrowed to the steady weight of the dog at his side. His knees were still weak, chest heaving, sweat and dirt mixed in streaks down his face. He had survived ambushes, explosions, and firefights, but nothing had left him as exposed as this, kneeling in the gravel, trembling in front of police officers, with a massive dog refusing to obey commands. The handler's hands were still tight on the leash, jaw clenched. He muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "I've never seen anything like this. Never, not in all my years with K-9 units." Marcus lifted his eyes and looked at the dog. It pressed its shoulder lightly against him, nose sniffing the air around his head, and it was in that moment that the veteran began to remember. Not just the dog, but the memory of the connection between man and K-9 during combat, and how certain instincts were impossible to suppress. Years earlier, Marcus had been part of a forward operating base near Helmand Province. His unit had a military working dog named Axel, a German shepherd with sharp intelligence and unshakable loyalty. Axel had saved him more than once from a hidden sniper, once from a buried IED that he had almost stepped on. The dog had sensed danger and responded instinctively. It had also sensed fear and vulnerability. Soldiers joked that Axel could read your soul better than any psychiatrist. Marcus's eyes widened as the pieces clicked together. The K-9 in front of him now was trained in military exercises, part of a program where police units collaborated with Army K-9 teams to study obedience, threat detection, and behavioral responses. It wasn't just any police dog. It had been exposed to the same battlefield instincts that Marcus carried in his mind, the same training, the same understanding of fear and trauma. No wonder the dog didn't attack. No wonder it had sensed that Marcus wasn't a threat. It wasn't about disobedience. It was about recognition. The dog had recognized a soldier, a veteran marked by trauma and instinctive caution, a man who moved like someone trained for war. And in its own way, the K-9 had chosen mercy over aggression. The realization was overwhelming. Marcus sank to the gravel again, pressing his hands against his face, sobs breaking free. He had been conditioned to survive in the worst of human and mechanical violence. Yet here, in the middle of a Texan highway, a dog trained for aggression had intuitively protected him instead. The handler finally spoke, voice strained with disbelief. This dog, it shouldn't be able to do this. It's trained to obey. It's trained to attack. But it's not attacking, not because it's disobedient, because it recognizes him. The younger officer, still shaking from the intensity of the encounter, finally lowered his weapon. Recognizes him how? He's just a guy on the road. No, the handler said quietly. He's not just a guy, he's a soldier, and that dog knows it. Marcus looked up, feeling the enormity of the moment press down on him. All the fear, the panic, the terror that had gripped him moments ago was fading, not because the officers had backed off, but because the dog had chosen to see him as something other than a target. Something human, something worthy of protection. The crowd, now growing more restless, murmured in confusion and awe. Phones recorded the dog pressing against Marcus, recording every subtle movement, every shiver and tremble, every connection. News of the incident would spread rapidly, but Marcus didn't care. Right now, all that mattered was the animal beside him, steady and unwavering. The officers, finally realizing the dog's refusal wasn't a sign of failure but an act of instinctive empathy, slowly began to relax. Weapons were lowered, posture softened. The tension in the air was still thick, but it had shifted from imminent danger to unbelievable wonder. Marcus whispered, voice cracking, It knows me, it knows." The handler swallowed hard. "It's the scent, the posture, the way he moves. I've seen dogs trained in military exercises do remarkable things, but this is different. This is recognition, pure instinct." Marcus's chest heaved. He realized the K-9 had not only prevented potential harm, it had also forced him to confront himself, to recognize that even after years of isolation, trauma, and suppression, some bonds, some understanding still existed in the world. A dog could read what humans often missed, the raw truth of fear, trauma, and survival. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He had ignored it during the confrontation, lost in the immediacy of fear and connection. Now, he pulled it out and saw messages flooding in, videos of the incident circulating, captions already describing the unbelievable scene. The footage had reached the crowd's phones, and from there, it was spreading like wildfire. Marcus felt a strange mix of embarrassment and awe. He had been exposed, kneeling, crying, vulnerable, in front of strangers, officers, and now the world. But he also felt something he hadn't felt in years: validation. Not from humans, not from authority, but from a creature trained to fight who had instead chosen empathy. The crowd began to whisper loudly now. "Did you see that dog?" one person asked. "It didn't bite him, it protected him." Another murmured, "It's like it knew him, like it understood." The handler finally released some of the tension on the leash. The dog remained seated, pressed gently against Marcus. For a man whose life had been defined by control, combat, and obedience, the sensation of being supported, recognized, and protected by a creature trained to dominate was almost too much to process. Marcus lowered his hand slowly. His body shook, but the sobs subsided. He looked at the dog's eyes, dark, alert, unwavering, and whispered, "Thank you, thank you." The dog pressed closer, a gentle nudge of reassurance. Marcus had survived ambushes, firefights, and bombs, yet this quiet act of understanding and protection, this recognition by an animal trained for aggression, felt like salvation. Behind them, the officers were silent. They realized something extraordinary had happened. A trained police dog had refused a command to attack, not out of disobedience, but out of instinctive compassion. Marcus Hale, a veteran haunted by war, had been recognized and protected in a way no human authority had managed. For the first time in years, Marcus felt seen, not just as a veteran but as a human being. And as the crowd began to murmur, taking photos and videos, capturing every miraculous detail, Marcus understood that this night, this impossible cinematic encounter, was only just beginning. The memory of the dog's instinct of its refusal to attack would spread far beyond this quiet Texas highway. The K-9 hadn't just saved him from a police confrontation, it had saved him from himself. And Marcus knew, deep in his chest, that everything was about to change. The night had long faded into early morning when Marcus Hale finally stepped back from the K-9, still trembling but slowly finding his balance. His uniformed protectors, officers who had moments before been prepared to escalate the situation, were now uncertain, silent, and unnervingly aware of the impossibility of what they had just witnessed. Phones buzzed relentlessly in the crowd, capturing every second of the encounter. Flashes of light illuminated the gravel and asphalt like a strobe show, highlighting the dog's massive form pressed against Marcus, the veteran's trembling frame, and the police officers frozen in disbelief. Within minutes, the first videos were being uploaded to social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and by dawn, the footage would have been seen by millions across the country. Marcus had never been in this position before. He was a man who had survived firefights, ambushes, and roadside bombs, yet now he was a viral sensation. The thought made his chest tight. He didn't feel heroic, he felt raw and exposed. But the world would not see the trembling, the panic, the fear that had gripped him. They would see a moment of awe, a police dog refusing a command to attack a veteran, choosing compassion over aggression. By morning, hashtags were trending. Vet saved by dog, hero K-9, police dog refuses attack. News outlets ran clips, social media influencers dissected every frame, and commentators debated the implications. Veteran groups praised the K-9 as a symbol of understanding and empathy. Others questioned the police protocol, raising concerns about obedience and control. Marcus sat in his small living room later that day, the K-9 lying peacefully at his feet. His phone buzzed continuously, calls, texts, notifications. Every buzz made his stomach twist. His hands, still shaking, hovered over the phone before he finally answered. "Mr. Hale," said a calm but urgent voice on the other end. "This is a reporter with the local station. We need your story, your side of what happened last night." Marcus hesitated. I don't know if I can. I wasn't thinking, I was just..." The reporter interrupted gently. "You need to. People need to understand. This isn't just a viral video. It's something bigger than all of us. The dog and what it did, it's extraordinary. And you need to tell the truth." Marcus exhaled shakily. All right, I'll try." The interviews were surreal. Sitting in front of cameras, lights, and microphones, Marcus recounted the night, the traffic stop, the K-9, the memories, the fear. He told the reporters about his tour in Afghanistan, the trauma he carried, and the moment he realized the dog wasn't attacking. Every word shook him, but it also felt like a release, like he was finally confronting decades of buried fear. Meanwhile, on the streets and across social media, the public reacted with overwhelming emotion. Veterans wrote letters of thanks, sharing their own experiences of being misunderstood, of panic and PTSD, of moments where the world seemed intent on seeing them as threats rather than people. Civilian viewers commented on the extraordinary loyalty and awareness of the K-9, calling it a miracle, a guardian angel in fur, and a lesson in empathy. The video became the centerpiece of debates about police training, mental health awareness, and trauma recognition. Police departments across the country were forced to confront the reality that a K-9's instincts could sometimes surpass human understanding. Marcus, once invisible in a world that didn't understand him, had become a symbol, not just of survival but of resilience and recognition. Even his fellow veterans reached out, some through social media, some in person, expressing awe and gratitude. "We've all been there," one message read. We know the panic, we know the fear, but seeing that dog recognize you, it gives hope. The national attention was both comforting and overwhelming. Marcus hadn't asked for fame. He hadn't sought validation. But the footage didn't lie. Millions had witnessed the moment the dog refused to attack a man who, in the eyes of some, might have been just another suspect. Instead, they saw compassion, understanding, and instinctive recognition. The K-9, meanwhile, had become a local celebrity. The dog's refusal to follow a direct command was being analyzed by experts, psychologists, and animal behaviorists. Some called it unprecedented. Others said it was a testament to the bond between humans and animals, and to the dog's remarkable ability to sense trauma. As Marcus scrolled through the messages flooding his phone, he realized how many lives had been touched by a single moment of recognition. People who had struggled with PTSD wrote that watching the video made them feel seen. Parents posted about teaching their children empathy by showing them the clip. Organizations discussed policy changes and support systems inspired by the encounter. Yet beneath the awe and gratitude, Marcus felt a persistent weight of unease. The officers involved, though shaken, still represented authority. Questions about protocol, obedience, and responsibility loomed over the story. The handler's report would go through internal review, and Marcus knew that scrutiny was coming. There would be backlash. Not everyone would understand. Not everyone would see the miracle. Even so, the moment had already shifted something profound. The K-9 had chosen humanity over command. Marcus had survived the night not through force or compliance, but through recognition and empathy. And the nation was watching, absorbing a lesson that words alone could not convey. Later, as he sat with the dog's head resting against his knee, Marcus whispered, voice trembling, "You saved me in ways I can't even explain." The dog lifted its eyes to meet his, calm and steady, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. It wasn't just the dog that had made an impossible choice. It was the reminder that even in a world dominated by rules, commands, and fear, compassion could prevail. And for Marcus, that knowledge, small, fragile, and extraordinary, was worth more than any medal or accolade he had ever earned. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. Social media had exploded. News networks covered the viral video endlessly, highlighting the unexpected heroism of both man and dog. The hashtags multiplied. Vet saved by dog, hero K-9, #police dog refuses, trauma awareness. Millions of eyes were now on Marcus and the dog, millions of hearts witnessing the silent act of recognition and protection. And in that quiet, fragile moment, Marcus realized something profound. This was bigger than him, bigger than the video, bigger than the dog. Something had shifted in the national consciousness. Something was changing about how people understood trauma, empathy, and the unexpected ways the world could protect those who needed it most. The night that had begun with flashing lights and fear had ended with a lesson that no one would forget. The K-9 had chosen, Marcus had survived, and a nation was watching. But Marcus knew deep down that the story wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The viral fame, the media attention, the public reaction, it would all come with consequences. Policies would be questioned. Departments would be scrutinized. And Marcus would have to face the officers, the system, and the reality that what had just happened on that Texas road might change law enforcement forever. By the time Marcus Hale woke the next morning, the world had already shifted under his feet. His phone vibrated constantly, text messages, missed calls, notifications from news apps, messages from friends he hadn't spoken to in years. The video of the K-9 refusing to attack him had gone viral. Millions had watched it. Millions had commented, debated, and shared their opinions. Some called it miraculous. Others called it a failure of police procedure. But for Marcus, it was surreal. He sat on his couch, the K-9, now calmly lying at his feet, resting its head on his boot. Its massive frame radiated a quiet warmth, a stark contrast to the storm of attention outside. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of the whirlwind. He hadn't sought attention, fame, or approval. All he had wanted was to survive the encounter without being mistaken for a threat. And now, the entire country was watching. By mid-morning, police officials had begun to respond publicly. The officer who gave the command for the K-9 to attack was placed on leave pending an internal investigation. Statements were issued, carefully worded. "We are reviewing the incident to ensure proper protocol was followed. Public safety and accountability are our top priorities." The statement didn't capture the human reality. The fear Marcus had felt, the panic, the trembling hands, the memories of Afghanistan flooding back, all of that had been nearly invisible to the officers, but it had been real, raw, and unavoidable. And now, a system designed to enforce control and obedience was under scrutiny for failing to recognize the humanity of a man who had given everything for his country. Veterans, organizations immediately reached out to Marcus. Emails, calls, and social media messages poured in, many thanking him for his courage and honesty, others praising the K-9 for its extraordinary intuition. He received messages from soldiers who had struggled silently with PTSD, some describing moments where they had been misunderstood or feared by law enforcement. The videos had struck a nerve, exposing a broader issue that transcended the viral clip. Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time from a local news station. "Mr. Hale," the reporter said, voice calm but insistent, "we'd like to interview you on live television. The story has gone nationwide and people want to hear your perspective." Marcus hesitated. Public speaking was something he had avoided for years. After touring combat zones, after decades of private struggle, he had never imagined he would become the face of a national conversation about empathy, trauma, and law enforcement. But as he looked down at the dog resting beside him, he felt a quiet resolve. "Yes," he said, "I'll do it." The interview was surreal. Lights, cameras, microphones. It was the opposite of the gravel shoulder where the encounter had begun. Marcus recounted the events with as much clarity as he could manage. The traffic stop, the panic, the K-9, the memories flooding back, and the moment the dog had refused to attack. His voice trembled at times, but there was honesty in every word, and that honesty resonated with viewers. Veterans, civilians, psychologists, and animal behaviorists weighed in. Discussions about trauma-informed policing, the role of K-9 units, and the ability of animals to sense human emotion dominated news cycles and social media platforms. Marcus's story became a catalyst for debate about how police approached encounters with individuals struggling with PTSD and trauma. Meanwhile, the K-9 itself became a symbol. The dog, previously just another member of the unit, was now recognized as a hero. Its refusal to obey a command was discussed in terms of intelligence, empathy, and instinctual recognition of human suffering. Some called it a miracle. Others described it as the beginning of a revolution in how law enforcement viewed both animals and humans. As the story spread, Marcus was invited to speak at veteran events. He traveled to military bases and support groups, sharing not just the story of the encounter, but his experiences in Afghanistan, the struggles with PTSD, and the unexpected lesson in empathy he had learned from a dog. The journey was emotionally taxing. Each retelling forced him to revisit the fear, the trauma, the helplessness he had felt on that Texas highway. But it also allowed him to confront the part of himself he had long ignored, the veteran who needed recognition, the man who had survived, and the human being who had been validated in an extraordinary, unexpected way. The officers involved remained under scrutiny. Internal reviews examined their decisions, their training, and their handling of the K-9 unit. Some questioned whether the dog's refusal indicated a failure in protocol. Others argued that it demonstrated the need for empathy and awareness in policing, especially when encountering veterans or individuals with trauma. The debate was heated and widespread, highlighting systemic issues that extended far beyond a single encounter. Throughout it all, Marcus found himself at the center of a conversation about justice, compassion, and understanding. Social media posts, news segments, and public discussions continually referenced his story. People were captivated not only by the viral video, but by the human story behind it, the fear, the vulnerability, the connection between man and dog that had transformed a moment of potential violence into one of profound empathy. Even as the world watched, Marcus remained grounded by the K-9 at his side. The dog, now retired from active duty, had become a permanent companion, a living reminder of the night that had changed everything. Its calm presence reminded Marcus that heroism didn't always come from bullets, medals, or orders. Sometimes it came from a quiet, instinctive act of recognition, an animal sensing fear, trauma, and humanity, and choosing compassion over aggression. By the end of the week, Marcus received a call from a national veterans organization. They wanted him to speak at a high-profile event, sharing his experience and advocating for trauma-informed practices in law enforcement. Marcus hesitated, speaking publicly, reliving the trauma, exposing his vulnerability. It was terrifying, but he knew the message was larger than his personal fear. He looked down at the dog, resting its massive head against his knee. Its eyes, calm and steady, seemed to say, "You've survived worse. You can do this." Marcus took a deep breath. "All right," he said quietly, "I'll do it." And in that moment, he understood the full scope of what had happened on the Texas highway. The encounter hadn't just been a singular, miraculous event. It had sparked a movement, challenged a system, and reminded a nation that compassion and recognition could triumph over fear and misunderstanding. The officers, the K-9, the witnesses, the media, and Marcus himself were all part of a story that was far from over. Internal investigations, public scrutiny, and national debates were only the beginning. But for Marcus, one truth had crystallized. He had survived the night, not just physically but emotionally, and the world had seen it. The story was now larger than him, larger than the dog, and larger than the moment on the highway. And as he prepared to step onto a stage to speak to thousands of people, veterans, civilians, and officials alike, Marcus knew that the impact of one dog's choice to act with empathy would echo far beyond that quiet, gravel road in Texas. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of recognition, the quietest acts of compassion, could change everything. Months had passed since that fateful night on the Texas highway, but the memory of it burned brighter than ever for Marcus Hale. The viral video had reached millions, the interviews had been aired countless times, and his story had sparked a nationwide conversation about empathy, trauma, and the role of law enforcement. Yet despite the media frenzy, Marcus remained grounded by the one constant through it all, the K-9, now retired from active duty, resting peacefully at his side. It was early morning when Marcus walked into the auditorium for the Veterans Support event. Hundreds of people had gathered, soldiers, civilians, psychologists, journalists, and advocates for law enforcement reform. The air was electric, charged with anticipation. Marcus felt the familiar surge of nerves, his chest tightening in the way it always did when speaking publicly. But today, he wasn't alone. The K-9, now named Shadow, walked calmly beside him, leash held loosely in Marcus's hand, a steady presence that had become his anchor. The crowd hushed as Marcus approached the podium. Cameras and smartphones recorded every movement, every expression. He cleared his throat, took a deep breath, and looked down at Shadow. The dog lifted its head, dark eyes meeting Marcus's, and he felt a wave of calm wash over him. "This story," Marcus began, voice steady but tinged with emotion, "isn't just about me. It's about all of us, veterans, civilians, law enforcement, and even animals who can teach us what humanity looks like." He recounted the events on the highway, the panic, the fear, the memories flooding back from Afghanistan, and the incredible moment when Shadow refused to attack. He described the instinctive connection between man and dog, the recognition that had saved him from an encounter that could have ended in violence, and the way the dog's empathy had transcended training, orders, and authority. As Marcus spoke, the audience was rapt. Some had tears in their eyes, veterans nodding in recognition, civilians gasping in disbelief. Shadow remained calm at his side, occasionally resting its head against Marcus's leg as if affirming every word. Marcus paused, scanning the room. For years, many of us have struggled silently. We've been misunderstood, feared, or ignored. But that night, a dog recognized something in me that no human had, and it saved me, not because of aggression, but because of empathy, recognition, understanding. He let the words settle, the silence in the auditorium thick and heavy. Then he leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a softer tone. Imagine if our systems, our policies, our procedures, our training were designed to recognize humanity the same way Shadow did. Imagine the lives we could save. The applause that followed was thunderous, heartfelt, and sustained. Veterans stood, many wiping tears from their eyes. Some in the audience had never felt seen, never felt validated. And in that moment, Marcus realized the impact of his story. It was bigger than himself, bigger than Shadow, bigger than a viral video. It had become a movement. Weeks later, the story reached Washington, D.C. Lawmakers, veteran advocacy groups, and law enforcement officials met to review the events and consider reforms. Shadow's refusal to attack had highlighted a gap in training, one that did not account for trauma recognition or PTSD awareness during police encounters. Veteran support organizations argued passionately that officers needed to be trained to recognize signs of trauma, not just criminal intent. After extensive meetings, a new national protocol was announced. Police departments across the country were required to implement trauma-informed training, including procedures for encounters with veterans, civilians with PTSD, and individuals exhibiting high stress or fear responses. K-9 units received updated guidance on recognizing human distress cues beyond direct commands. Shadow's act of recognition had literally changed policy at the highest levels of law enforcement. Meanwhile, Marcus continued speaking at events, schools, and conferences. His story became a blueprint for understanding, a model of how empathy, whether human or animal, could transform potentially dangerous encounters into moments of safety and connection. Shadow accompanied him wherever possible, the dog now a national symbol of instinctive compassion, calm strength, and moral courage. Back at home, Marcus would sometimes sit quietly in his living room, Shadow lying at his feet, watching the sun set through the window. He would run a hand through the dog's fur, reflecting on how a single moment of recognition had altered his life, sparked national change, and inspired millions. The fear, panic, and trauma he had carried for years had been acknowledged in the most unexpected way. A dog had seen him, truly seen him, and responded. One evening, Marcus placed his service medals on the coffee table, carefully arranged, and looked at Shadow. "You changed everything, buddy," he whispered. Shadow responded with a soft nuzzle, resting his head on Marcus's knee. It was a quiet moment, intimate and profound, one that no news clip or viral video could fully capture. In the months that followed, Marcus received letters from veterans and families across the country. Stories poured in about individuals who had been misunderstood, feared, or ignored, and who had now been inspired to speak, seek help, or advocate for change. The ripple effect of that night on a Texas highway was far-reaching, touching lives in ways Marcus could never have predicted. Law enforcement officers, too, began to see the value in trauma recognition. K-9 units were praised not just for their physical abilities, but for their sensitivity to human emotion. Shadow's actions were cited in training seminars, textbooks, and conferences. What had started as a frightening traffic stop had become a catalyst for nationwide reform. Marcus often thought back to that night, the flashing lights, the growl, the instinctive fear, the collapse to the gravel, and he realized the depth of what had happened. A man broken by war and trauma had been confronted with force and authority, and a dog had seen through the fear, understood the humanity, and made a choice that changed everything. It was cinematic, almost unbelievable, but it had happened. And as Marcus sat with Shadow at his side, watching the quiet stars appear in the Texas sky, he finally allowed himself to feel a sense of closure. Not because all his fears had disappeared, not because the trauma had vanished, but because he had been recognized, validated, and given a second chance in a world that often overlooked those who bore invisible scars. He reached down, resting a hand on the dog's head. "You did it, Shadow. You really did it." The dog lifted his eyes, calm and wise, and nudged Marcus's hand with a gentle warmth that said more than words ever could. In that moment, Marcus understood the full scope of what had happened. One act of recognition, one choice to respond with empathy, had rippled outward, changing laws, inspiring a nation, and saving lives in ways he could never have imagined. The system hadn't changed overnight, but one dog had listened when humans didn't. And for Marcus Hale, that was enough. The story of the Texas highway, the veteran, and the dog that refused to bite would be told for years to come, not just as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson in humanity. Because sometimes, the quietest acts of understanding create the loudest echoes of change.